This is a fight for the very soul of our country. Over the next few weeks and months, our job is clear. We must raise our voices as we have never raised them before. And that's why I'm here today. I'm here to talk about the United States Supreme Court, to talk about the open seat, to talk about the nomination of Judge Kavanaugh. And I'm here with a group of moral leaders to talk about the moral implication of filling this open Supreme Court seat with Judge Kavanaugh. I want to start with the 4 words that are etched above the doors to the Supreme Court of the United States. Equal justice under law. Equal justice under law. What that means to me is that every person who comes through those doors can count on equal justice under the law, on being treated the same, regardless of whether they're rich or poor, black or white, male or female, gay or straight, equal justice under law. What troubles me so deeply about the direction that the United States Supreme Court has gone over the past several years is that it has increasingly tilted pro-corporate over and over and over. When a big corporation is in court against an individual, the corporation wins more and more and more of those cases. I actually want to give you some numbers on this. In the Rehnquist court, the Chamber of Commerce, representing business, won 56% of the time. In the Burger Court, I should have done these in order. In the Burger Court, the Chamber won 43. So think about that. In the Burger Court, the Chamber of Commerce won 43% of the time. In the Rehnquist Court, the Chamber of Commerce won 56% of the time. And since 2006, in the Roberts Court, the Chamber of Commerce has won 70% of the time. Think about what that means. Overall, in the Roberts Court so far, corporations have won 62% of the cases they've been in whenever they are up against workers, shareholders, people who represent the public interest. This court, the Roberts Court, is already the most pro-corporate court in America since at least 1946. And now we come to the Kavanaugh nomination. So we have a court that is the most pro-corporate court when Justice Kennedy is still a swing vote. What will Judge Kavanaugh add to this court? Let's start with the fact of how he got here as a nominee. He was handpicked off a list that was pre-screened by the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation. And let's just be blunt about what this means. His nomination is a threat to people of color, to women, to workers, to the LGBTQ community, to people living in poverty. He is part of making this court not represent equal justice under law, but making this court represent corporate interests against the interests of individual human beings in this country. Now, I'm proud to have this opportunity to stand here with faith leaders, with moral leaders from all around our country. For me, this moment is crystallized in Matthew 25. It is crystallized in the Bible. When the question is asked, you all remember the story. The Lord separates the goats from the sheep. You remember where the goats are going? It's not heaven, okay? And where the sheep are going, not, if you're following this. Everybody should know this story, regardless of your religious traditions, right? But at the end, the shepherd, the Lord, answers the question, why us? Why were we picked as sheep? Why are we the favored people and others were picked as goats? And the answer is because inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of these, the least of thy brethren, ye have done it unto me. What does that passage mean? I read that passage to say there is value in each and every one of us. There is something of great value in every single human being. I also read that passage to say it is not enough to have a good heart and recognize that value. We are called to act on that value. We are called to act, not to sit by when things go wrong. We are called to act, to feed the hungry, to give water to the thirsty, to clothe the naked, to visit those in prison. That is our job. And the third thing I read this for is to say that we are on the moral side of history. When we think about the future of this country, and we think about another turning point where we can decide that our courts should be more pro-corporate or our courts should care more about individuals, more about the live human beings and the lives they lead. This is a choice for us that is a moral choice. And that's why I'm so honored to be here today. I want to introduce the Reverend Barber, who has made fighting for those who have less, fighting for these, the least of thy brethren, the heart of his ministry. He has been shocking the conscience of our nation with the Poor People's Campaign. He's now held rallies in more than 30 states. He is a pastor, he is a bishop, he is a civil rights champion, and he is someone I am proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with in the fight for an America that lives up to its values. Reverend Barber, you're the one up. There you go. It's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Senator Warren and Senator Booker and Senator Sanders, who just stepped out to be back, and most of all, to this cadre of powerful moral leaders from around this country that you will hear from, Catholic, Latino, evangelical, presidents of seminary, who have, and even from McConnell's district in Kentucky, who have a word to say in this moment. Again, I'm the Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II, President of Repairers of the Breach and the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for a moral revival where thousands of people over the last few months have engaged in civil disobedience, nearly 4,000 people in 40 states in the District of Columbia, calling for an agenda that will address the issues of systemic racism, poverty, ecological devastation, the war economy, and the false moral narrative of so-called Christian nationalism. I'm a preacher of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and I want to be clear. If Kavanaugh, who has been nominated by a president who lost the popular vote by more than 3 million votes, Kavanaugh, who has been recommended by the extreme judicial regressive Heritage Foundation and Federalist Group, Kavanaugh, who could be confirmed by a simple majority vote for a lifetime appointed. If he is appointed to the Supreme Court, we could be facing the most regressive Supreme Court since Jim Crow. And we know that when the courts have been wrong in this country, and there have been many times, that it has turned us backwards rather than forward. In the light of this, there must be a moral fight to keep Kavanaugh off the Supreme Court, because we must fight to protect the deep moral foundations of our Constitution, to ensure domestic tranquility, to establish justice, to provide for the common defense, and promote the general welfare. Now, given the enthusiasm of the so-called Christian right, I know many are concerned about the future of Roe versus Wade if Kavanaugh joins the court, and we should be. But something also is much more important in the history of American jurisprudence at stake, rather than just that piece. We must drive and force and insist on intense questioning. We've come today as moral leaders to share some of those questions with our senators. We need to know, where does Kavanaugh stand on the settled law of equal protection under the law? Where does he stand on seeing Brown versus Board of Education as settled law at a time when we're seeing more resegregation in high poverty schools like we've never seen in the history of this country and massive amounts of money being cut from public education? The reason we must go this deep is because Brown was never just about the desegregation of schools. It was about the federal government declaring that it would defend the equal protection under the law for all Americans for the first time since white supremacists overthrew Reconstruction in the 1800s. That's what Brown was about. And we need to know, where does Kavanaugh, where does he stand on that issue, and how does he apply that law? This law: no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. And then this part, particularly in this time when children are being snatched: nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection under the law. Extremists on the far right have understood the importance of Brown. They have sought time and time again to undermine the 14th Amendment, which I believe, except for the First Amendment, is the most important of all the amendments, because without the 14th Amendment, the rest of the Constitution is terribly flawed and inadequate. With this nomination, senators, we could have the most extreme court we've seen since Jim Crow. This court, in recent years, has been wrong, and with this nomination, the court could be even worse and more extreme. The court we already have was wrong on voting rights. It's been wrong on workers' rights. It's been wrong when it has treated corporations like people and people like things. With this vote, we could have an extreme court that would undermine voting rights, workers' rights, the rights of the poor, women's rights, LGBTQ rights, public education, health care, immigrant rights, and the future of our democracy. This settled law, equal protection under law for all persons, will be in question based on who we put on the court. And in this moment, just like in 1896, we need folk to be like that great Kentuckian John Harlan, Justice John Harlan, who was the great dissenter. He was the lone dissenter in the Plessy versus Ferguson. We must dissent. We must stand together for the dignity of all Americans, for the rights of the poor, and for the protection of all people. As the senator said, not individuals, but nations will be judged by how we treat the poor and the sick and the undocumented and the least of these. And we must, in this moment, like Justice Harlan, send a resounding no to this Kavanaugh appointment, and no to any justice being appointed with a simple majority vote in this particular time for a lifetime appointment. To do so would be immoral, would be wrong, and it would be to violate one of the scriptural commands that says in Isaiah 10, "Woe unto those who legislate evil and rob the poor of their rights and make women and children their prey."
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Barber. Thank you. And next we have Senator Sanders.
I want to thank Senator Warren for organizing this event and thank Reverend Barbara for being here. Reverend Barbara has decided to pick up where Dr. King left off when he was assassinated, and that is to remind our country about its moral values, and also to remind the American people that in the richest country in the history of the world, 40 million people should not be living in poverty. 30 million people should not be having no health care. 1 out of 5 Americans should not be in a position where they can't afford prescription drugs. Young people should not be in a position where they can't afford to go to college solely because of their lack of income. So I want to thank Reverend Barber for his moral expositions. and for standing with the most vulnerable people in this country. And what we are talking about today is something that I fear many Americans really do not know much about. People know what a president does. More or less, they may know what a Congress does. But I do not think that most Americans understand the extraordinary power of the Supreme Court. Today, overwhelmingly, regardless of your political point of view, people are outraged that billionaires are buying elections. Do people know that that is a direct result of the Citizens United Supreme Court decision, 5-4 Supreme Court decision? Right now, many millions of people who desperately need health care do not have the health care that Congress voted for them to have through the Affordable Care Act because of a decision of the United States Supreme Court that said that governors could deny the expansion of Medicaid. Do people know that Supreme Court did that? Right now, in an outrageous situation, a frightening situation, states all over this country are suppressing the vote for poor people, for people of color, for young people, because the Supreme Court decision regarding the Civil Rights Act of 1965. And that's what governors now and attorneys general all over the country are doing, purging people off of voter registration rolls. So if you think the Supreme Court's decisions are not important, then you have not followed what has gone on in recent American history. And now we look at a situation where the constitutional right of a woman, not the government, to control her own life is at stake. That's right. That decision will likely be coming before the Supreme Court. Today, I think it was today, an NBC poll came out, 71% of the American people believe a woman, not the government, should make that decision regarding her own body. And what will Judge Kavanaugh rule on that? Over 90% of the American people support the Affordable Care Act provision, which says that insurance companies cannot discriminate against people who have pre-existing conditions. Who thinks now that because you have cancer or heart disease, you should not be able to get the health care, the health insurance that you need? That decision will be coming before the Supreme Court. And then we have another matter, especially relevant with the Trump presidency. And will there be a check on presidential power? Every American should be concerned that Judge Kavanaugh has written that a president should be able to deem laws unconstitutional and not enforce them, even if a court has found the law is constitutional. Now, I'm not a constitutional lawyer. Senator Warren is. But if I am not mistaken, that undermines everything in the United States Constitution. The checks and the balances, the separation of powers. If a president can say, hey, I could do anything I want to do, then you're throwing the Constitution out the window. That is what is at stake right now, especially relevant under a lawless president named Donald Trump. So I would hope that the American people will join us in state after state to demand that this nomination be defeated and that the president brings forth a nominee who respects the American people and working families and the Constitution of the United States. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we'll hear from Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey. Senator Booker.
Thank you very much. It is an honor to be here in a different kind of press conference at a different kind of moment. I'm not here because of politics or even here because of left or right. This press conference is to really make it clear that this is a moral moment in our country. Yes, sir. This is a moral moment in our country. This is not a political moment. This is not a partisan moment. This is a moral moment in our country. And I'm honored to stand, not just with my colleague, Senator Warren and Senator Sanders, but I'm honored to be standing here with some of the great moral voices in our nation, people who represent different faiths and ideals. But we know in this country, ingrained in the very fabric of our nation, are moral ideas.
That's right.
Moral ideas that are reflected in every major faith on our earth. These ideas that individuals matter. These ideas that no matter how wealthy you are or how powerful you are, it is about people over power. It is about community over corporations. It is about the ability that people born in this country, it is that sacred ideal that every life has dignity, every life matters. And it doesn't matter how you're born, what station in your life. In this country, you have the opportunity to make it, to advance, based upon the content of your character, based upon the worth of your spirit, the dignity of your soul, based upon your abilities. And this should be the nation where those moral ideals mean something. That's why I stand and say, as a nation that has not achieved that yet, because people are born in this nation don't have access to prenatal care. People born in this nation who might be saddled with disease or health challenges don't have access to life-saving drugs. People in this nation who know that their dignity and worth and value is equal to others, but their voices are being drowned out by corporations pouring obscene amounts of money to drown them out. This is a moral nation that we have. And we are still in that journey to make it to being truly the promised land, truly the dream nation. And my life, in the less than 50 years that I've been alive, we've seen this nation make strides to valuing the individual person, to giving more freedom. I am here because the Supreme Court expanded voting rights. I am here because the Supreme Court saw my worth and my dignity equal to others despite the color of my skin. I am here because the Supreme Court saw that workers had rights to organize, that workers had rights to put together, to pool their energy and resources and form unions. I am here for these reasons and more. And that's why this is a moral moment. It is a crossroads. It's the first time in my life. Well, we've already seen the Supreme Court waver on individual rights. We've already seen the Supreme Court undermine access to health care. We've already seen the Supreme Court roll back voting right gains. We've already seen the Supreme Court in Citizens United elevate corporations to be equal to God's children. But now, what's at stake now is us to fully roll back these ideals. That people have the power to marry who they love, that people have access to the ballot that is just as robust as their neighbor, just as robust as other communities. This is a time where they're trying to roll back civil rights. Roll back the protections against discrimination if you have a pre-existing condition. There is so much at stake here that this has nothing to do with politics. This is to do with who we are as moral beings.
That's right.
And so I want to call on everybody. I'm not here to tell folk just what they should know. I'm here to call on folk to understand that in a moral moment, there is no neutral. In a moral moment, there is no bystanders. You are either complicit in the evil, you are either contributing to the wrong, or you are fighting against it. There's a saying from the Abrahamic faith in one of the Psalms that says, "Yea, though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death." We are walking through the valley of the shadow of death. But that doesn't say, though I sit in the valley of the shadow of death.
Well, now.
It doesn't say that I'm watching on the sidelines of the valley of the shadow of death. It says I am walking through the valley of the shadow of death. It says I am taking agency, that I am going to make it through this crisis. And so I am calling on everyone right now who understands what's at stake, who understands who Kavanaugh is. Maya Angelou says, if someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. He has shown us who he is when he ruled on a woman's right to control her own body. He has shown us who he is in his perceptions as corporations, as more powerful and more important than people. He has shown us who he is on the ability for workers to organize. He has shown us who he is on civil rights and voting rights. So the question isn't who he is. The question is who we are.
Yes.
In a moral moment, will we do nothing? And don't tell me it's impossible. Don't tell me about the rules of procedure. Don't tell me about the numbers that are in the Senate. Human history is, and American history in particular, is a perpetual testimony to the achievement of the impossible. We are a nation that has had miracles happen in every generation. People making a way out of no way. Folk getting up the rough side of the mountain. And now I call on everybody to believe now that you can make a difference. Do not underestimate your power. Do not surrender your agency. This is the time to speak up. This is the time to wake up. This is the time to act up. This is the time to get in some trouble. As John Lewis says, some good trouble. I end with just a prayer. I learned about the story when I was a boy in Bible study of a great threat. Moses sent people into the promised land, 12 folks to view what was going on, and 10 of them came back and said, we can't meet this challenge. The obstacles are too great, the foes are too mighty. But 2 men had a different view. Joshua and Caleb saw something different. Joshua and Caleb refused to surrender to fear. They refused to surrender to cynicism. They had a belief in the promised land. They had a belief that we could become a beloved community. We need the Joshua spirit now. We need the Caleb spirit right now. There's too much at stake. This country is not preordained to be the promised land. It has been crafted through the sweat and the struggle and the blood of so many people to make this a more promising nation, to make us, as Isaiah said, a light unto people. But the light is threatened right now. The darkness is beckoning. And each and every individual must have a bold heart, a courageous spirit, and say, if the light is threatening to go out, then I'm going to choose to be the light in this moment. I'm going to choose to act. I'm going to choose to work. I refuse to surrender in this moral moment. Let us choose not to surrender. Let us, in this moment, every person of good conscience in our country, regardless of what party you're in, let us choose in this moment to fight. Thank you.
And now Reverend Barber is going to introduce the moral leaders who are with us here today.
Let me certainly thank Senator Warren for calling this gathering, and Senator Booker and Senator Sanders for being here. We wanted you to know that a new day is in America. When you talk about evangelical, don't just go to the normal players. A group of us have actually challenged Graham and Paula White and Jeffries and Falwell to an open public TV debate, because a lot of folk have been using the faith in wrong directions. So today, people who understand the 140 million poor and working and low wealth people in this country are going to speak. Reverend Dr. Washington from Kentucky, Reverend Megan Huston from Kentucky, McConnell's area, Rabbi Jonah Samuels, Reverend Dr. Catherine Henderson, Lisa Sharon Harper, Reverend Dr. Noah Castellanos, and Sister Mary Ellen, Jewish Christian evangelical, coming to this podium to talk about this nomination and what should be our moral focus. Would you come first, Reverend Dr. Washington, and then they will follow and give you the rest of their name and title.
Thank you, Dr. Barber. Bishop Barber. I am Reverend Dr. Valerie Washington, pastor of Hewlett Temple AME Zion Church in Louisville, Kentucky. As a minister of the gospel, I must ask, what does the Lord require? Majority Speaker, leader, what do the Lord and the people expect you to do? Do justly for all people. Be fair in your decision making. Will God be glorified or horrified? Show love and mercy. As God has been merciful to you, will you do the same for the dreamers, for the middle class, equality to the women? As a professed Christian, will you select officers that have godly judgment or trump mandates? Addison, Mitchell, McConnell Jr., will you demonstrate your love of God by humility and working with him? Will he cry when he walks with you because of the way you treat his people, or will he rejoice? We demand answers, Senator McConnell, to this rushed, politicized process and to your mandate to the people of Kentucky and this great nation.
My name is Reverend Megan Houston, and I'm a minister in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ serving in Bowling Green, Kentucky. As a pastor and a mom of 2-year-old twins, I believe that all life is sacred, including the 47% of women in Mitch McConnell's home state of Kentucky who are poor or low income.
That's it.
If we want Kentucky to be a place where women and families are prepared to welcome life into the world, then we must prioritize the needs of the poor over the wealth of corporations. I fear the devastating consequences of my senators' hypocritical hurry to confirm Brett Kavanaugh. I urge Senator McConnell to consider the real needs of mothers and of families in Kentucky.
My name is Rabbi Joanna Samuels. I'm the Executive Director of Educational Alliance's Manny Cantor Center on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. I am so proud that I lead a community of immigrants who have come to this country to build better futures for themselves, but most of all for our nation. My community members, they hail from all 4 corners of this earth, and they come to the center that I run, and you know what they do? They take citizenship classes, they learn to speak English, and they wait longingly until the day that they can register to vote. The immigrants in my community, they believe in this democracy. They believe in our country, just like my great-grandparents did when they came to this country, and perhaps senators just like you or your ancestors did when they came to this country. In my community, when someone registers to vote, we celebrate. We celebrate. It's a sacred ritual. We are right there next to them when they register to vote, and you know what we say? We say, Amen. Amen. Senators, as you evaluate this nominee for our nation's highest court, I ask you, are you prepared to ensure that the right to vote remains a right? Senators, are you prepared to honor the efforts and the dreams of the American people? Senators, are you prepared to build more democracy in this country and not less? I ask you, my community and I, we are awaiting your answer.
I'm the Reverend Dr. Catherine Henderson. I'm president of Auburn Seminary in New York City, a 200-year-old institution that pursues the spiritual mandate to build a more just nation. The Supreme Court is where the moral heart of America is codified into law. I come today with grave concerns about the nomination of Judge Kavanaugh, who in his decisions has privileged the wealthy and powerful over workers and ordinary citizens. Already, our systems prioritize profits over people. And we are seeing the negative effects of Citizens United, where corporations are granted the same rights as people. I am sure that Judge Kavanaugh, as a practicing Catholic, knows that people, human beings like us, not corporations, are made in God's image, including the most vulnerable among us, especially those that Jesus loved. Senators must be satisfied that nominee Kavanaugh would not advance the dominion of the powerful and wealthy and corporate interests, but rather make wise decisions that are equitable for all people. Americans are demanding that we turn the tables on the way money exerts power and influence in our political temple. Senators must ask Judge Kavanaugh how he will reflect our Constitution's core values that ensure that all Americans have a voice and a vote. The question Judge Kavanaugh must answer is this: as a Supreme Court justice, how would your decisions ensure that the rich and the powerful do not count more than the rest of us? How would your presence on the court, Judge Kavanaugh, fulfill the mandate of being a just and generous America?
Hello, my name is Lisa Sharon Harper. I'm the president of Freedom Road LLC, based here in Washington, D.C. The author of The Very Good Gospel, and I'm also an evangelical. I represent 35 national clergy and faith leaders who have issued a call to pause the culture wars. And here's why. First, the strategy of the culture war to shift the balance of the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade won't work. It won't actually work for its stated goal, which is to end abortion in the United States. Rather, the strategy would actually just send the decisions back to the states. But the states with the with the highest abortion rates are unlikely to overturn Roe v. Wade. So the majority of abortions will still happen in these United States. We know what works. Decrease poverty, you decrease abortions.
That's right. That's right.
The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops in 2014 issued a report on abortion and poverty, and they found that poverty is the key driver of abortion in America. Second, past is prologue. Majority conservative rulings have consistently hurt people of color. A majority conservative Supreme Court with lifetime appointments would have 2 to 3 generations to dismantle Brown v. Board of Education and every legislative act that rests on that ruling. Restricted rights lead to increased poverty, and increased poverty leads to increased abortions. The culture war's 35-year-old ideologically driven strategy will not end abortion, but it will put the lives of brothers and sisters of color in the pews right next to us at peril.
That's right. That's right.
This week, evangelicals across the country will quote, #pledge to pause the culture war. We are fasting, we are listening to the pleas of people of color, and we are acting by calling our senators to only confirm a moderate, independent justice that will protect Brown v. Board of Education. Thank you.
Amen.
Good afternoon, everyone. Senators, good to be with you. My name is Reverend Dr. Noel Castellanos. I'm the president of the Christian Community Development Association in Chicago. We represent over 1,500 congregations and faith-based organizations that serve hundreds of thousands of vulnerable families all over this nation. I'm a Latino evangelical pastor that has lived alongside Mexican descent neighbors for all of my life. The first half of my life, because that's all I could do. I was with my family. But the second half of my life as a choice to live alongside immigrant men and women. I'm going to speak out today, demanding, urging that the Senate not ignore the life and death concerns of over 60 million Latino residents and citizens of this great nation.
That's right. That's right.
Most of them are legal. Most of them are legal, okay?
Yes.
And that number is only going to continue to grow year after year after year. I'm here today because as a faith leader walking regularly with young people all over this nation from Latino heritage. I am concerned about the trauma being felt by over 1 million dreamers and DACA recipients living in fear because of the threat of being separated from their parents and loved ones, either by detention or by deportation. I'm here because, as an evangelico, I value all human life created in the image of Santo Dios, Holy God. I fear that Latino men and women and children in our churches and barrios will suffer for generations to come if we do not take the time to question nominee Kavanaugh's commitment to protect our community's constitutional rights, and not only the rights of the rich and the powerful. It is striking to me that every single day immigrants spend their energy and give their life to serve the majority of dominant culture Americans, putting food on our tables, cleaning our homes, taking care of our yards, and most ironically, even raising our children and teaching them to speak Spanish. We must be certain that Kavanaugh's commitment to uphold the constitutional gains that we have made as Latino immigrants will not be eliminated or jeopardized. As a nation of immigrants, delaying the confirmation of our next SCOTUS justice until at least the end of our midterm election might be a beginning step to make sure that we get this right. That's right. To get this decision right for justice for our nation and for our Latino community across this great land. It's especially right and necessary for DACA students today, for asylum-seeking mothers and children. And even though we want to label all immigrants and Latinos illegal, this afternoon I want to say that many of the 11 million undocumented men, women, and children that are trapped in today's broken immigration system, forced to live in the shadows, open to being abused and treated not as people but as property.
Yes. Yes.
That we've got to say that this appointment is too important. Yes. Too important to not hold our leaders accountable to do the right thing.
Yes. That's right. That's right.
Good afternoon. My name is Sister Mary Ellen Lacey. I'm a daughter of Charity, a Catholic religious sister, and I work at Network, a national Catholic social justice lobby. As Catholics, our moral framework teaches us that those who would defend the right to life of the weakest amongst us must be equally visible and equally powerful in our defense of the quality of life for the powerless among us. We recognize the image of God in the impoverished, marginalized person, in the unprotected worker, in the migrant at the border, and the victim of gun violence. Yet case after case, Judge Kavanaugh sides with the rich and the powerful over the most vulnerable members of our society, the employer over the worker, and the predator over our environment. I urge senators today to delve deeply into this pattern, clarify with Mr. Kavanaugh his appreciation of the constitutional mandate to our government to provide for and to protect the common good, the 100%, which includes our impoverished brothers and sisters and the workers. I would urge you, senators, to explore the belief system, the legal understanding that caused Judge Kavanaugh to repeatedly diminish protections for the unionized workers and the environment. Senators, we spend years vetting an innocent terrorized refugee before allowing her to enter our country to be safe from certain death. I urge you to spend sufficient time to vet Judge Kavanaugh's history and prior decisions before allowing him to make decisions on our highest court that will definitely impact our economic security and the safety of our nation. Thank you.
Well, as you have heard from this broad spectrum of moral and religious leaders, evangelical, Catholic, Latino, president of seminary, persons who live in Kentucky, speaking directly to Senator McConnell, as you have heard from this Catholic sister and my Jewish sister, Senator Warren, Senator Booker, and other senators, there is a moral voice that is not paid off and bought off, that is not merely spouting extremism and trying to justify injustice by misusing the language of faith, which is theological malpractice. The scriptures are clear that when it comes to public policy, woe unto those who legislate evil and rob the poor and women and children of their rights. The scripture is clear that a nation must make sure that its laws lift the hungry, the hopeless, the poor, the sick, the naked, and the least of these, and the stranger. It is very clear. And we have come here to raise questions. We won't be on the hearings, but we're asking that these questions be raised, that Americans of all would raise their voices. This is too big and too important. And when we have gotten the Supreme Court wrong in the past, the America has gone backwards rather than forward. We cannot afford to get this wrong when children are being snatched from their mothers and not being provided equal protection under the law. We cannot afford to get this wrong when the Voting Rights Amendment has still been gutted, and even today, from gerrymandering to voter suppression to voter purging, millions of Americans are losing their right to vote. We cannot get this wrong as long as women and the rights of women are being undermined. We cannot get this wrong when workers are being denied their rights to unions and people can work 40, 50, 60 hours a week and still not make a living wage. We cannot get this wrong when for every 1 million people denied health care, 5,000 people don't get sick, they die. We cannot get this wrong when there's 140 million poor and working poor people in this country, and every year more than 250,000 people die from poverty. We could correct. We cannot have a Supreme Court that is supremely extreme. We cannot have a Supreme Court that is supremely on the side of money and not on the side of mercy, which is supposed to be the role of our Constitution, to protect citizens from the overreach of greed and corporation. We cannot, as my dear friend said, we worry all the time. We hear all of these people. We don't want foreigners in the country, where we cannot have a justice confirmed that is a foreigner to the precepts of equal protection under the law. We cannot get this wrong. And whose decisions up to this point have been foreign to everything we hold dear. So we need to raise our moral voices. Yes. I agree with Senator Booker and Senator Warren. We need to be in the streets and in the suites. We need to raise our moral voices. This issue is not about left versus right. It is about right versus wrong. And it's time for us to stand up.
Amen.
Questions from anyone?
We're here to take any questions. Anybody have a question on this? Yes, ma'am.
Just to be practical here.
Could you identify yourself?
Yes, I'm Ann Ball with Fox News.
Okay.
Okay, so on a practical basis, how are you in the Senate going to get the votes? This is for the senators.
I want to say something on that practical.
Yeah, but I'd like to hear from the senators also. How do you win this and kill the nomination? Go ahead.
Well, I want you to hear from them, but that's a question that always comes up. See, if practical was the issue, people would have never fought to end slavery. Because remember, the Supreme Court voted in 1952 for the Dred Scott decision, but Frederick Douglass didn't quit, he kept on. If folk had been practical, women would have never fought against the denial of women's right to vote. When the 1965 Voting Rights Act was passed, the people in the Congress didn't change. There was no election. What changed was the consciousness of the nation. People were willing to get in the streets and stand up and raise the issues, and people who never intended to vote for a Voting Rights Act voted. We believe that there is, with the right conscience and critique and whatnot in the street, that there is a lot of room if people will lean into the better angels of themselves and not to the demons of injustice and racism and inequality. And so we are of the people who say to these senators, don't do what's practical unless you're going to practice standing up and practice doing what Justice Harlan did. Because even if the person is confirmed, if the dissents are right enough, history will turn, and people will hear, and people will stand up. But we want you to do what is just. We want you to believe. We want you to stand. If it means like Strom Thurmond did when he stood on the floor of the United Senate and filibustered the Civil Rights Act of 57 for 24 hours, line up every senator you can to stay up there for 72 hours. But do whatever has to be done to make sure that people know Houston, Washington, D.C., we have a problem. We have a problem.
Amen. I was here a year ago when people said, be practical. You don't have the votes to save health care for tens of millions of Americans. You just don't have the votes. After all, the bill passed the House. Every single Republican voted to roll back health care for tens of millions of Americans. Every single Republican voted to roll back the protections for people who have pre-existing conditions. And then it came over to the United States Senate, and people said, be practical. You don't have the votes to stop it. Well, I'll tell you, I stood on the floor of the United States Senate. I stood because I was too worried to sit down. But I stood while senator after senator on the Republican side voted yes, take away health care from millions of Americans, take away protection from people with pre-existing conditions. But I also stood there as my Democratic colleagues, one after another, said no, we will protect health care for millions of Americans. We will protect people with pre-existing conditions. We will protect people living in nursing homes who have to depend on Medicaid. And I was there as three, count them, three, Republicans crossed the aisle and said, I will vote not on political party, I will vote on what I know is right in my heart. And why did they do that? They did that because millions of people, tens of millions of people, hundreds of millions of people across this country raised their voices. And they raised their voices to say, protect health care. Health care is a basic human right. People who didn't have health care raised their voices. People who depended on Medicaid raised their voices. But here was one of the best parts. People who had health care, people who were perfectly healthy, raised their voices and said, I care about human beings in this country. And I believe that health care is a basic human right. We said it as a nation. Democrats said it, Republicans said it, independents said it. Enough of it said it together that every single Democrat and 3 Republicans saved health care for millions of Americans. That's how I'm practical. You bet. You bet. That's practical. Corey, got more?
2 pastors.
Okay. 2
pastors.
All right, you do the next one. Okay. Anybody else have a question? Anybody? How about if we just close by saying thank you to all of you for coming here, and thank you for bringing a dimension to this Senate that is too often missing. That too often we don't talk about the moral dimension of what we do. Oh, you get a conversation going over there on the floor of the Senate about economics, about politics, you bet, about policy. Much of the time, you can get those conversations going. But the conversation we need to have in America is a conversation about who we are as a people, about our values, about what we believe in, because every single thing we do in this building is about the manifest statement of what we value as a nation. Corey and I are the elected representatives of people who mostly ask us to come here and do the right thing as best we can, to pray on it, to ask on it, to think on it, to do everything we can to get this right. And I am grateful to each and every one of you for being here, for being part of this, and particularly grateful to you, Reverend Barber. Thank you again for being the voice. We need you.
Thank you all. Thank you all.